January 31st, 2025. At exactly 6:27 p.m., Marian Bowman Jr.'s heart stopped beating inside a sterile room at Broad River Correctional Institution in South Carolina. He became the first person in the U.S. to be executed that year. There were no headlines, no media circus, no famous lawyers fighting in his name, just a small group of official witnesses, one chaplain, a few guards, and his mother, sitting silently in the front row, holding her breath as she watched her son lie still on the gurney. And yet what shook the room wasn't the silence, it was his voice. "I didn't do it, I didn't take Candy Martin's life. I asked God to have mercy on my soul. I love my family, I am innocent." He didn't scream, he didn't cry. He spoke softly, clearly, like a man who had rehearsed those words over and over in his head for more than 2 decades. Marian Bowman Jr. was 44 years old. For 23 of those years, he'd lived in a concrete box under constant surveillance, labeled by the justice system as a danger to society. But to most of the country, he was a stranger. No hashtags, no viral petitions, no true crime docuseries bearing his name. His case never made the news beyond his home state. And yet, in that final moment with his body strapped down and the needle in his arm, what do we make of someone who maintains his innocence until his last breath? Was it defiance? Was it denial? Or was it the truth, the case that brought Marian Bowman Jr. to death row was complex, murky, and for many, still filled with unanswered questions. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, no DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, only people who testified. Some got reduced sentences, some walked free, and yet their stories weren't always consistent. One even allegedly admitted behind bars that he was the one who pulled the trigger. That confession never made it to court. In the days leading up to his execution, Bowman made an unusual request. He wanted to know the exact dosage of the drugs that would be used in his lethal injection. He'd seen other inmates suffer, bodies convulsing, breath choking, when the protocol wasn't followed correctly. He didn't want to go out like that. He also asked for an interview to speak to the press, to share his version of events, maybe for the last time. The state said no, no interviews, no cameras, no public statements, just silence. And so on that cold January morning, he woke up at 4:30 a.m. He showered. He ate part of his breakfast in silence. He declined a final phone call. He spent most of the day alone in a holding cell a few feet from the execution chamber. Outside, a few protesters stood in the rain, holding signs begging for clemency. On the other side, the victim's family waited for closure. At 6:05 p.m., he was led into the chamber. He did not resist. He did not speak again until the moment came. "I didn't do it, I'm innocent." And then's nothing. Just a long exhale, a soft blink and silence. Marian Bowman Jr.'s name may not be remembered by many, but his final words still hang in the air. If he was telling the truth, what exactly did we just witness? Justice. Or something else entirely? If Marian Bowman Jr. was telling the truth, what exactly did we just witness? Justice, or something else entirely? To answer that, we have to go back to a small town in South Carolina. Back to the night everything changed, and back to the woman at the center of it all. Candy Louise Martin. She was 21 years old, a young mom, a daughter, a friend, someone who had dreams, though they were often on hold. Someone who made mistakes, like most people her age, someone trying to do better for her son. On the night of February 16, 2001, Candy got dressed to go out with friends. She wasn't planning anything wild. Just a Friday night in Somerville, small-town music, a few laughs, and a break from the pressures of single motherhood. She left her little boy with her mom, promised she wouldn't be late, slipped on her jeans and a red blouse, grabbed her purse, just the basics, ID, car keys, and a $20 bill. It was the kind of night that felt like nothing special, and maybe that's what makes it hurt more, because it ended up being her last. The evening started like many others, at a local house with low music, cigarette smoke, and people who knew each other too well. But not long after, things shifted. According to multiple witnesses, Candy had a phone argument before leaving. Some say it was with Bowman, others claim it was another ex. The truth? Still unclear. What's known is this: shortly after midnight, Candy climbed into her Chevrolet Lumina and drove off. She was never seen alive again. In the days that followed, police would piece together a fractured timeline. Witnesses claimed Bowman had been looking for her, that he'd been upset, that he was talking strange, that he wanted something back, a debt maybe. An explanation, maybe more. But those were just pieces of a puzzle. And no one knew what really happened during those missing hours between the time she left that house and when her car was found burning in the woods. What makes this even harder is that Candy never had the chance to speak for herself. She wasn't there to clarify what she was feeling, who she talked to, what she feared. Her voice, her truth, was taken violently and without warning. What remained were only bits and echoes: her burned-out car, the bullets the fire didn't destroy, and the child she left behind. It's easy in cases like this to reduce the victim to a name in a file, to forget the humanity. But Candy was more than what happened to her. She was a daughter who still called her mom every day. She was a mother who worked long hours so her son could have diapers and warm food. She was someone who had a complicated history with Bowman, but that doesn't mean she deserved what. To understand that, we have to go back to that night. Back to February 17, 2001, just a few hours after Candy disappeared, and back to a rural road in Dorchester County, where something strange caught a patrol officer's eye. It was around 3:15 a.m. when a local resident reported hearing what they described as a dull boom in the distance. Not an explosion, just a low, heavy thud from the woods. No one called it in. No one checked. In a place like that, loud noises after dark don't always raise alarms. Hours later, during a routine morning patrol, a deputy came across something that didn't belong. A Chevrolet Lumina, blackened and warped, parked just off a gravel road surrounded by trees. The tires had melted. The glass was gone. The paint had peeled away in sheets. The car had been set on fire deliberately. But it wasn't just a car. Inside, in the back seat, lay the charred remains of a human body. What happened next was a blur of flashing lights, crime scene tape, and questions no one could yet answer. The fire had been so intense it scorched the asphalt beneath the frame. There was barely anything left: no purse, no wallet, no phone. The only way to confirm the victim's identity was through dental records. It was Candy. The 21-year-old mother who had promised her son she'd be home that night. She never made it back. The autopsy revealed a detail that would become central to the case. Candy hadn't been alive when the fire started. She hadn't suffered the flames. Someone had ended her life first, then moved her to the back seat, then used gasoline to ignite the interior of the car from the inside. 3 bullets, 1 to the chest, 2 to the head, told the rest of the story. To the prosecution, this wasn't just a tragedy. It was personal. It was calculated. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing was stolen. This wasn't a crash. The damage was too intentional. Whoever did this didn't just want Candy gone. They wanted her erased. The fire destroyed her face, her clothes, her jewelry, even the license plate, but it didn't destroy the questions or the need for someone to answer the problem. There were no cameras, no eyewitnesses, no clear motive, just rumors, past arguments, and an old relationship that had soured over time. That's when detectives turned their attention to someone from Candy's past. Someone who had recently clashed with her, someone who was reportedly upset, someone who had no alibi that night. Marian Bowman Jr., but did the evidence point to him, or was it built around him? Was he guilty, or just easy to... Because the moment police identified the body as Candy Martin, they knew they needed someone to answer for what happened, fast. And in the absence of physical evidence, they turned to the next best thing: people who knew her. People who had stories to tell. And suddenly, everyone was talking. It didn't take long for one name to rise to the surface: Marian Bowman Jr. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a suspect from out of nowhere. He was someone Candy had known since high school. They weren't officially a couple, but they had a complicated history: off-and-on arguments, unresolved debts, emotional tension that had never quite settled. Some said he had been upset with her in the days leading up to her death, that she owed him money, that he'd been trying to reach her, that he'd said things, strange things, about being done with the games. No one could agree on what exactly he said. But the implication was enough to raise eyebrows, so police brought him in. Marian didn't run, he didn't change his story, he didn't ask for a lawyer. He sat down with investigators, answered questions, denied everything. He said he hadn't seen Candy that night, he didn't know where she went, he didn't know who would do this. To the detectives, that calm demeanor didn't scream innocence. It felt cold, detached, too quiet, but silence isn't guilt. So they needed more. That's when they turned to his circle. And one by one, the people around him started to speak, each one offering a version of what might have happened. The first to step forward was James Gadsden, Marian's cousin. He told police that Marian had confessed to him privately shortly after the crime. Said he was angry, said it went too far, said he didn't mean for it to happen like that. James was facing legal trouble of his own. But in exchange for cooperation, he got a deal: 20 years. Then came Travis Felder, another acquaintance. He said he helped dispose of the car, that he poured the gasoline, that he lit the match. He got just 3 years. And then there was a third witness, unnamed, protected. All charges against them were quietly dropped. No records, no public statements, just silence and immunity. On paper, the case, because not long after the trial, Gadsden's credibility began to crumble. In a separate case, he was accused of lying under oath. And then, inside prison, an inmate named Ricky Davis said Gadsden had confessed again. But this time, he said he was the one who pulled the trigger. Not Bowman. That information was never brought before the jury. So now the case rested on a series of testimonies, each one incentivized, each one inconsistent, and all delivered by men trying to reduce their own sentences. There was still no weapon, no DNA, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage, just words, and a grieving community desperate for someone to blame. Bowman stayed silent, no confession, no explanation, he just kept repeating, "I didn't do it, I don't know why they're accusing me." But the prosecution wasn't looking for mystery, they wanted resolution. And in May of 2002 they got it, the trial of Marian Bowman Jr. Lasted just 6 days. No drawn-out legal battles, no expert witnesses, no slow build of suspense. From the moment jury selection began, the outcome felt inevitable. The narrative had already been crafted. A jilted man unable to let go. A dangerous personality hidden behind a quiet face. And 3 witnesses flawed, yes, but consistent in one thing, they all pointed to Bowman. There was no physical evidence. The murder weapon had never been found. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing tying Marian directly to the car, the scene, or the body. But the prosecution didn't need physical proof. They had testimony, and they had a story. They painted Bowman as angry, unstable, and possessive. They leaned into his silence, his lack of emotion, his quiet nature. To the jury, it was framed not as innocence, but as coldness. His defense attorney didn't help. A court-appointed lawyer, white, impatient, and by many accounts disconnected from the case. He referred to Candy Martin in court as, quote, "just a little white girl." The room went still, even the judge looked uncomfortable. But the trial continued. When Bowman asked to replace his lawyer, the judge denied the request, so he stayed stuck with a defense that didn't call key witnesses. That didn't challenge the credibility of the state's star informants. The jury never heard about the prior perjury charges against Gadsden. They never heard about the immunity deal for the third witness. They never saw the internal memo warning that the testimony might not hold up under scrutiny. Because none of that made it into open court. What they heard instead was a tidy story, a motive, a timeline, and 3 men pointing fingers at the quiet one. That was enough. On the 6th day, the jury came back, guilty, capital murder. Plus 10 years for vehicle arson. Sentence, death by lethal injection, no retrial, no delay, just a one-way ticket to death row. For the state of South Carolina, it was closure. For Candy Martin's family, it was justice. And for Marian Bowman Jr., it was the beginning of a new kind of isolation. The kind that comes with being locked away, called a monster, and never truly heard again. He was 21 years old when he entered the prison system. He would never walk free again, but he never changed his story. "I didn't do it." And for the next 23 years, he never stopped saying those words, "I didn't do it." In a system built on silence and survival, Marian Bowman Jr. held onto those 5 words like a raft in open water. Not for sympathy, not for headlines, but because it was the only thing he had left. The world outside moved on, phones got smarter, presidents changed. New tragedies took over the news, but inside South Carolina's Broad River Correctional Institution, time moved differently. Slow, repetitive, crushing. Bowman's life on death row was like that of hundreds of others waiting to die by court order. 23 hours a day in a concrete cell. 1 hour of recreation, often alone. No physical contact. No privacy, not even to use the toilet. A tray of food slid through a slot, a voice on the intercom, a camera watching every movement. But even in that isolation, he didn't shut down. He started to write. Letters to family, poems. Reflections on the world he no longer knew. He joined spiritual programs, became a mentor to younger inmates. And over time, he gained a quiet reputation not as a rebel or an agitator, but as someone gentle, calm, and steady. He didn't preach his innocence, he didn't yell, he just endured. His mother never stopped visiting, never missed a birthday, never stopped believing her son had been swept into something bigger than he could understand. She said he was never the same after the trial. Not broken, just worn down, confused. Like a man who couldn't make sense of what had happened to his life. He was never diagnosed, but childhood teachers had long noted that Bowman struggled with comprehension. He had trouble reading, trouble understanding instructions. And now, in the most complex legal maze imaginable, he was expected to navigate it alone. He filed appeals, claimed his trial lawyer had failed him, that key evidence had been ignored. That race had played a role in his prosecution. One by one, every appeal was denied, and then came the final blow. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his case. With that, the countdown began, 135 days. That's all he had left. Those final months were different. He was moved to total isolation. No radio, no books, no human contact, not even a table or chair, every movement monitored. Even his bathroom breaks were recorded. When meals were delivered, guards avoided speaking to him. There were no more programs, no more letters in or out, just the knowledge that the clock was ticking. And still, he didn't lash out. He didn't ask for a stay of execution. He didn't beg for a new trial, he wrote. He prayed, he waited. 1 month before his scheduled death, the ACLU filed a lawsuit arguing that Bowman should be allowed to speak to the media, to tell his story, to put his voice on record once and for all. The state denied the request. No interviews, no press, only silence. But silence isn't always quiet, sometimes it screams. And with every passing day, the question grew louder. What if he was telling the truth? What if the man they planned to execute didn't do it? By the time January 2025 arrived, that question no longer mattered. Not to the courts, not to the state, not even to the warden who had to oversee the final procedure. For the system, Marian Bowman Jr. was already gone. What remained was just logistics. He was woken at 4:30 a.m. on January 31st. The last day of his life, they asked if he wanted a shower. He said yes. They asked if he wanted to make a phone call. He said no. He ate part of his breakfast, mostly in silence. Didn't touch the orange juice. Then he was moved to a holding cell just steps from the execution chamber. Outside the prison, it was gray and cold. A group of protesters, small, silent, stood behind a barricade holding handmade signs. Don't kill the innocent. This system is broken. Around 5:45 p.m., Marian Bowman was offered his last meal: fried shrimp, cornbread, fried chicken, and a slice of dessert. He ate slowly, methodically, not finishing everything. No last-minute message. No emotional breakdown, no tears, just a man staring down the final hour. At 6:05 p.m., the guards came to escort him. He didn't resist, he didn't speak. He simply walked calmly, deliberately into the chamber where the gurney waited. Witnesses said he looked peaceful, not numb, not angry, just resigned. As if he had made peace with a reality that never made sense. When he lay down, they strapped his arms and legs. One last chance to speak, he took it. I didn't do it. I didn't take Candy Martin's life. I ask God for mercy on my soul. I love my family. I am innocent. No last-minute drama, no delay, just a quiet sigh, a long blink, and then stillness. At 6:27 p.m., his heart stopped. The official cause of death: lethal injection via controlled dose of pentobarbital. He was 44 years old. He had spent more than half his life behind bars waiting to die. He left behind no children, no memoir, no public statement, just unanswered questions. A few minutes after the announcement of death, a prison official noted that there had been no complications. No signs of pain, no spasms, no struggle, just silence. And yet, not everyone agreed. One member of the witness panel, a retired corrections officer, later told a reporter, "It didn't feel like justice. It felt like a system going through the motions, and we may never know if we got it right." The body was returned to his mother. There was no official apology, no acknowledgement of possible error, no effort to reopen the case, just a closed file, a signed death certificate, and a story buried under routine. But for those who followed every quiet, painful twist, his final words still echo, "I didn't do it." And when a man carries those words to his deathbed, maybe we owe it to him. Because if Marian Bowman Jr. was innocent, if there was even a possibility he was innocent, then what we witnessed wasn't closure. It was a failure, not a dramatic headline-grabbing scandal, but the quiet kind. The kind that slips through cracks in the system and disappears into paperwork. There were no overturned convictions, no exonerating DNA, no last-minute confession from someone else. Just inconsistencies, deals, omissions. And a case that moved too quickly for its own good. Let's look at what we do know. No physical evidence ever tied Bowman to Candy Martin's death. The murder weapon was never found. 3 key witnesses all received benefits in exchange for their testimony. One of those witnesses, Gadsden, was accused of perjury in a separate case. Another inmate, Ricky Davis, claimed Gadsden had privately confessed to being the one who pulled the trigger. That statement never presented at trial. The court-appointed defense attorney didn't bring it up, didn't challenge the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses, didn't call expert testimony, didn't even request a mistrial after making racially insensitive remarks in court. The judge allowed it all to proceed. 6 days, one verdict, no appeals accepted. So why wasn't more done? Was it fatigue, negligence? Or was Bowman simply an easy target, a young man from a broken home, no money, no powerful connections, limited education, emotionally passive, easily influenced? In a community desperate for justice, he fit the mold too well. And sometimes that's all it takes. For Candy Martin's family, this was never about gaps in the system. For them, someone had to pay, and they believed that person was Marian Bowman Jr., and maybe he was, but the truth is we don't know. And in the world of criminal justice, not knowing should never be enough to take a life. The death penalty is supposed to be reserved for the worst of the worst. But what if it's being handed out to the quietest of the vulnerable? What if what we killed wasn't just a man, but a truth we never fully heard? What does that say about the system, about what we call justice, and about the price we're willing to pay to feel like a case is closed? Because for every Candy Martin, there is a rightful demand for accountability, but for every Marian Bowman Jr., there should be an equal demand for certainty. And in this case, certainty never. So what did we really get in return? A sense of justice? Or just someone to blame? Communities need closure. They need to believe that tragedy won't go unanswered, that when something horrific happens, someone will be held accountable. And in Summerville, South Carolina, in the early 2000s, Candy Martin's death wasn't just a personal loss, it was a public trauma. A young mother taken violently, a child left without a parent, a community suddenly fearful that the danger might still be out there. So when law enforcement made an arrest just 3 days after the crime, people breathed easier. They needed a name. And Marian Bowman Jr. fit. He had a known connection to Candy. He had a recent disagreement with her. He didn't have an airtight alibi. And he didn't fight back when they brought him in. But does being quiet mean being guilty? In the eyes of the public, maybe it was enough. After all, they weren't in the courtroom. They didn't see the lack of forensic evidence. They didn't know about the suppressed testimony. They didn't hear how a young man with limited understanding had no voice strong enough to push back. All they knew was that the system acted swiftly, that someone had been punished, that Candy Martin got justice. But justice for whom? For the public, for the press, for politicians. Because if Bowman was innocent, if the case had holes big enough to question everything, then who exactly did we protect? Did we save the community, or did we just give it a narrative that made it feel safe again? It's a haunting trade-off, peace of mind versus precision, speed versus scrutiny. And it raises an uncomfortable possibility. Sometimes the person the system rescues first is itself. It protects its appearance, its stats, its certainty. Even when certainty isn't there. What would it have looked like to take a step back, to slow down, to acknowledge that there was still doubt? Would the public have tolerated that? Would Candy's family have accepted it? Or was it always easier to lock someone away, close the file, and never look back? In the end, Marian Bowman's story isn't just about guilt or innocence. It's about the cost of conviction. Not just what we punish, but who we punish to feel like justice has been done. Because sometimes the person who pays isn't the one who caused the pain, and that's a truth we don't always want to face, but we have to. Because when a life is taken, whether by violence in the woods or by protocol in a prison chamber, it deserves our full attention, our full honesty, and our full accountability. So now, with the case of Marian Bowman Jr. Closed forever, the question lingers like a shadow. Was this justice, or just an outcome? Marian died with no confession, no breakdown, no admission of guilt. What he left behind was a final sentence. Not from a judge, but from his own mouth. I didn't do it. We heard it, his mother heard it, the witnesses heard it. And now so do you. There's no appeal for the dead, no retrial for someone who's been buried, no press conference announcing maybe we got it wrong. And maybe that's the part that hurts most. That in a country built on the idea of justice. For Candy Martin's family, that final gavel hit may have brought some closure. For the state, it was another case resolved. For the public, it became one more story lost in the noise of a million other tragedies. But for those paying attention, for those who know how easy it is to build a case without building the truth, This one stays with you because Marian Bowman wasn't famous. He didn't have a documentary or a GoFundMe. He didn't have a celebrity calling for a retrial. He had a whisper, a soft voice, a complicated history, and a system that wanted a name more than it wanted answers. So ask yourself, if the wrong person can be sentenced to death without hard evidence, if testimony alone, flawed, incentivized, and later questioned, can end someone's life, if a man can be punished more for his silence than his actions, then what does justice really mean? And more importantly, could it happen again? This isn't just a story about one case. It's a warning, a reminder that in the pursuit of justice, certainty must outweigh convenience. That every case, especially the ones without a clear answer, deserve to be examined with doubt, humility, and care, because the cost of getting it wrong isn't just a closed file, it's a human life. This was Final Sentence. The story of Marian Bowman Jr., a man who may have carried the truth all the way to the graves.